Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a short delay before the final session, a short delay.
Hello, bonjour, ahoy. Last night, the 13th edition of the Czech and Slovak Transatlantic Awards were held at the Prague Castle, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen accepting the award, as well as Czech diplomat Martin Povéšil being posthumously recognized for his efforts in Czechia's integration into NATO and the European Union. And here are the highlights from day 2. We started with opening remarks by Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky, followed on by a high-level panel focusing on countering Russia's hybrid threats. Staying on the Havel stage, the PMs of Denmark and Albania, as well as the President of Finland, did a deep dive on Europe's opportunities, risks, and the road ahead. Shifting to the Schwarzenberg stage, a diverse mix of European voices from the Czech Republic, Montenegro, Slovenia, and Sweden look to the future and the key priorities for the EU's new leadership. Front and center on the Albright stage, high-level interventions from government, multinational organizations, and the private sector delved into what a new era of European defense industry encompasses and how to get there. Globsec President Robert Vash led a thought-provoking discussion on strategic leadership with the Finnish president, who also participated in a Globsec Young Leaders Forum roundtable. Outside of Europe, a critical discussion surrounding flashpoints in East Asia yielded valuable takeaways, with Simon Birmingham, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and Senator for South Australia, speaking with the Globsec Young Leaders Forum. A sober reality check about conditions on the ground in Ukraine blended views on the current battle space and next steps for Kiev, as well as its allies. A spirited back and forth on the Western Balkans' EU ascent took center stage, with talks revolving on how to build trust and cooperation that will bring the region closer to the EU. To end the day on the Havel stage, in his first interview since being released from prison in Russia, Vladimir Kara-Murza, vice president of the Free Russia Foundation, outlined in detail the circumstances of his arrest by Putin's regime, the torture he underwent, and the long-lasting health issues he still suffers from. Don't go anywhere. There are still big names to be heard from and big waves to be made. Check us out online and see you on day 3.
welcome the moderator for the final session, Valerie Hopkins.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see an almost full house for the last and final, but I'm told most optimistically titled panel, Russia Beyond Putin. Before I invite the speakers to the stage, I would like to remind you that one of them will be speaking in Russian, so all of you should have headsets. If it's not working, try to switch it on and select channel 1. That'll be Russian to English translation. And now it's an honor to invite our speakers to the stage. We have Mikhail Khodorkovsky. We have, yes. Mr. Khodorkovsky is the co-founder of the Russian Anti-War Committee. Please come and take a seat next to me. Roland Freudenstein, who's the director of the Free Russia Foundation's Brussels office. And Mikhail Zygar, who is a columnist for Der Spiegel and the author of 4 wonderful books. Please have a seat. We already started out having a very interesting and quite robust, I would say, debate in the speakers' room. And I hope it's my intention that we can continue that and have a lot of interactive back and forth on this stage before I invite what I assume will be numerous questions from the audience. We'll already be taking them on Slido, and I will also open it up to the audience to ask some questions. I think, Mikhail Borisovich, I would like to start with you. I was in Paris when the news of the prisoner exchange was announced. I rushed to Bonn for the very first press conference, and the very first question that I received from my editors before any of the recently released members of the Russian opposition were even allowed to, or had even made any public statements, was, what does this mean? Will this reinvigorate the Russian opposition? And I wanted to ask you, what can and cannot be expected of the Russian opposition in exile? Not only the recently released people, but also those who have been working already from abroad for many, many years. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I am very happy for the opportunity to speak here, and I'll give a few seconds to those who don't speak Russian to put their headsets on. The Russian opposition, just like any normal people, we were very happy that people who are innocent will be freed. And of course, we all hope that the released prisoners will return, obviously, to their personal lives, which is extremely important, but that they will also continue working with us. What can the Russian opposition do, and what is it doing, and what should you not expect from the Russian opposition? We need to understand that we are dealing with a totalitarian regime. A regime that is ready to use armed forces not only on their neighbors but also against their own citizens. So do not expect for now the opposition to oppose this regime in a military way. What we can do and what we are doing is counter-propaganda and forming a vision for the future. This is a very practical task. So obviously everyone understands what counter-propaganda is, but the vision for the future, it may sound a bit abstract, but it's really not. See, the people in Russia need to understand that there are alternatives to what has been happening in the country for some 25 years. And they need to understand how this alternative can be achieved. And this should not be some secret knowledge. It should be something that will be, for the people, as easy to understand as in the late 80s, when the people in the former Soviet Union said, we want to live like people live in the West. But how did they know how people live in the West? Well, because they were told, they were convinced that this is good and this is right. Today, when I meet and talk with young Russians, some of them don't fully understand and appreciate that many of the freedoms and opportunities that they still have are a result of the fact that this dream of living like the Westerners live came to be.
I'm going to ask you to respond to that a little bit. I mean, you are also a Russian citizen. Do you feel represented by the Russian opposition currently? And what would you like to see from them more? What would you like to see from them less?
We found ourselves in a very new situation, I would say, a couple of years ago, after so many Russians left the country. I think maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I think that we really have two Russias now. We have outer Russia and inner Russia, and the outer Russia is as big as any European country. We have much more than 3 million people living outside of Russia. We are not sure that they share the same values, but for sure we do have some democratic institutions that unify somehow all Russians living in this world and some of our compatriots in the inner Russia. And the independent media are the most important. I would say for now we don't have real Russian opposition is yet to show its capacities and its capabilities. But for now, we have independent media are as the only pillars of Russian society, because they unify, they create the cultural code, they create the agenda, they create the set of values for those Russians who hate Putin, who want Ukraine to win, who want this war to stop and Russia to become normal, decent, democratic country. And we have a lot of such people, and they are mostly unified by the independent media. Somehow they could be treated as some kind of political parties in Russia, and I think most Russians, for now, are represented by those independent journalists who are trying to work, and I think it's really very unique situation. And we have a lot of, as journalists, I do not consider myself to be a politician, but I love what Mr. Khodorkovsky said about the attempt to make some vision of the future. I see my mission as completely different. My personal mission is to create the vision of the past, because I'm an author who writes about history, and I think that's extremely important to try to create another historical narrative, because we know that traditional historical narrative of Russia has been used to justify this war, has been used as a part of the propagandist campaign. And actually, we don't have any Russian history which is not a propagandist one. For ages, it has been some false version that created the imperial construct of Great Russia, and it's right time to start demolishing it, to start debunking all those myths. Those myths were not created by RT or by Putin. They were created many centuries ago. And we like to start thinking about the future of new Russia. We have to create completely different perception of ourselves. And we are right in the beginning of this work, and a lot needs to be done. We have, like, I hope, I'm rather optimistic about our capabilities, but it's going to be needed decades of work to re-educate a lot of people, to convince that we should change our perception. It's not only about Putin. It's about each of us. It's about how we see ourselves, our how history, how we see history of Russian peoples, not even Russian people, not even Russian state, but like a lot of different nationalities who were, their histories, their stories were stolen by the Russian Empire, and we need to give them their voices back. So I think we have a lot of work.
Indeed, and I mean, you started a lot of that work with your book, War and Punishment, which was excellent. Roland, I want to turn to you. I mean, we have two figures from Russian opposition on stage, and you are representing liberal-minded opposition Russians in Brussels. What are the real tensions and frictions when you discuss with policymakers in Brussels? What is it that EU institutions or those who are setting the Russia policy do and don't understand about Russian opposition today, and are there any fair or unfair expectations in your mind of them?
Okay, there are certainly expectations. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and I'm really honored to be in your company. I want to go back to something I experienced in the 1980s, because I'm that old, working with Polish Democrats in exile, and also traveling to Poland, because that was possible at the time, under communism, and working with the underground and with Polish Democrats in Poland. But many of my West German compatriots at the time, in the mid-1980s, would ask me, Roland, your Polish friends, they seem to have a lot of time, they talk a lot, they write a lot, they're totally disunited, they have no universally recognized leader, they're losing contact with their home country, by the way. If anything ever changes in Poland, no one knows what kind of role they will be playing in that process, and 10% of them are agents anyway. Does that sound familiar? And that's an answer, that's a response I get from some people in Brussels when I talk to them about the necessity and the benefits of working with pro-democracy Russians today. And, you know, my answer to that is, maybe except for some very special cases like some Baltic countries and their exile communities during the Cold War, but with that exception, show me one opposition in exile that is really united, has a universally recognized leader, is in full touch with their home country, and so on, and so on, and so on. And besides that, today there is YouTube, and there are social media, and there are possibilities to stay in touch in a way that was completely impossible during the Cold War. So, coming back to Brussels, and this is the last part of my answer, you have a whole spectrum of reactions among Brussels stakeholders. In the European Parliament, for example, it's very positive. The benefits of working together with Russian Democrats, planning for a post-Putin future, and improving the sanctions regime, and helping Ukraine also through cooperation with pro-democracy Russians, all this is clear to most of them in the European Parliament. When you come to some member state representatives, that is not so clear. And I have this painful feeling that sometimes pro-democracy Russians have the wrong enemies or the wrong critics and the wrong friends. What I mean is that if you look at many representatives of Eastern flank countries and Nordics and Baltics and Poland, there is a fundamental distrust coming back to exactly the prejudices that I was just quoting from the 1980s from my West German compatriots. And the tragedy is that the very descendants, so to speak, of the Polish dissidents today are extremely wary about the viability of working with Russian Democrats. And then you have wrong friends, if I may say so, many West Europeans, who are the people that helped to bring about this completely pathological relationship between Western countries and the Putin regime. And since they cannot throw themselves into the arms of Putin anymore, they throw themselves into the arms of any Russian that walks along the street, which is the wrong motivation. They should like our people because they're Democrats, not because they're ethnic Russians. That's not the point. So I think pro-democracy Russians should actively work against these two tendencies and should be reminding those false friends that, listen, we're in a global struggle for democracy, and we Russian Democrats are part of this global struggle. And we should reinforce our efforts to convince the Eastern flank countries and their representatives that it is really far-sighted and to the benefit of us all to work with pro-democracy Russians.
Mikhail Borisovich, how do those sound to you? I wanted also to ask you, it's been 921 days. What do you assess as the strengths and the weaknesses of the Western response to Russia? And we've seen a reignition now of the debate about sanctions, whether they should be highly targeted towards the elite or have a much broader consequences on ordinary Russians and the population. What do you advise people when you go around having meetings with Western officials?
Well, there is no disagreement on the inside and with the West about whether sanctions are effective. They are. They are not effective in ways that was expected, but they do affect what is happening a lot. But when it comes to communication and goals, this is, I believe, something that the West needs to reassess. I understand that there are many people who think it would be good if Russia simply didn't exist. But that will not happen. Whatever the setup will be in the next decades that we can look forward to, in the next decades the West will have to coexist with Russia, with 140 or 120 millions of Russians. It doesn't matter what the exact number is, it's a lot of people. Now, putting yourself against this nation is wrong, even if this nation is going against the West. For instance, people say, oh, how can you believe that this war is led by Putin, that the Russians play no part in it? My response is, well, I know what the polls look like. I know how many Russians support the war today for whatever reasons, and there are many. But from the pragmatic standpoint, should I or should the West be saying that we are at war with the Russian nation? No, we should not be saying that. That would be a mistake. You know what the commanders learn when they first come into the army? Never yell at the entire corps. Do not yell at your soldiers when they are lined up. If you want to affect one soldier, make him take 2 steps to the front and talk to that soldier. Because when they are all lined up, any people, when they line up, they feel protected. And if the rhetoric is going to say we are against the Russians, well, the Russians really won't care. So it's very important to clearly separate the Russian people from the Russian decision makers. We need to say that we are at war with the decision makers. Then, when the situation will change, and it will, you will still have the opportunity to prevent another war or the continuation of the current war. So this is one mistake that the West makes. Another mistake that the West makes regularly is trying to find a good Tsar for Russia. This Tsar is bad, we'll find a different Tsar, he'll be A-OK, great. This is a fundamental mistake. The super-centralized Russian government will always be aggressive. Because when you have an enemy that's on the outside, that is what allows this super-centralization to exist and to continue. And if we want Russia to stop being aggressive, what we need to do is to convince people, which is what the opposition is doing. We need to convince the Russians that federalization is necessary, a parliamentary republic is necessary, that there needs to be some sort of system of balances and counterbalances, so basically the elements of decentralization. We are not talking about dismantling the country. That's dangerous. We are talking about decentralization. And this is something that the Russians can very well understand. This is something you can work with. And the last thing I think the West needs to think about is that when the situation will start changing in Russia, and it will start very soon from the historical perspective, 5 or 10 years from the historic perspective, that's basically tomorrow. Now, when that happens, the West will not have any control over what will happen in Russia. But there will be some sort of an influence, 10 to 15%. And the West needs to understand how to use this influence, and they will need to act fast, not getting stuck thinking and being like, oh, we should take action now, oh, it's over. If the West started acting when this full-scale war began, if it started acting the way it acts now, the war would have been over long ago. And this is a mistake that cannot be repeated when the changes do start happening in Russia.
To jump in, you about the first part of Mikhail Borisovich's intervention and Misha about the second, right? So Roland, why don't you jump in?
Okay, thanks, Valerie. First of all, totally in agreement with this question of course, the West is not at war with every single Russian. On the other hand, this is not just Putin's war. So it's complicated. The reality, the truth is somewhere in the middle. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of Russians who are cooperating with this massive aggression, with the war crimes and so on, and committing them also. So it is really, really complex. But collective guilt as a concept was actually dismissed by World War II allies after 1945. They were talking about treating every German as guilty for the crimes that had been perpetrated by Germans and also by ordinary Germans in World War II. And at the end, the decision led by the United States in 46, 47 was the concept of collective guilt is counterproductive to the attempt, to the effort to build a viable democracy in West Germany after the war. And that is with all historical differences, that is a guideline here. But, now I'm coming to the sanctions. The purpose of the sanctions is not to punish Russia or to punish the Russian people. The purpose is to reduce Putin's ability and Russia's ability to fight Ukraine, to annihilate Ukraine, to wage this war. And yes, there is collateral damage that has consequences for every Russian. But that cannot be the first concern of the people who came up with the sanctions. And the first concern at the moment should be how to make them work better by preventing circumvention, by preventing using third countries to export banned goods like semiconductors and machine tools and whatever. And of course also how to further reduce the raw material imports that are still happening from Russia to European Union and NATO member countries. So to sum it all up, when it comes to the Western reaction and lack of strategy, you said that in the run-up to this debate.
I'll continue that.
Yeah, but look, the glass is half full. I mean, we would, on 24th of February 2022, we would, in our worst scenarios, we were imagining a much, much worse situation than we have now, with a relative unity of the West, with a relative functioning of the sanctions, I insist on that, and with a nevertheless largely successful support of Ukraine. We can argue whether it was enough, whether it is enough, and whether it should be faster, and so on. But by and large, the West is pretty united here.
I will open it up to audience questions, but first I want to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you are both right. But when you mention our conversation about lack of strategy, I think that there is lack of strategy on Russia. And there should be also like strategy on Ukraine, strategy on Eastern Europe, and strategy on Russia. And that's exactly what Mr. Khodorkovsky was talking about. I perfectly remember the first days of the full-scale invasion and the first months of full-scale invasion. All of my sources, all of top Russian businessmen and some Russian bureaucrats were in panic. They were expecting collapse to happen really soon. They were talking, I remember a huge investment banker based in Moscow who told me that he won't be able to fly within Russia because he was expecting the planes to crash down because obviously Boeing and Airbus would not be providing the parts for the airplanes. And what do we have now? Gabon is #1 exporter of the parts for Airbus and Boeing airplanes for Russia, and there is no shortage of any technologies, including Western technologies. Yeah, there are technologies from China, and every second taxi in Moscow is a Chinese vehicle, but the Western technology is still coming. So probably that, but what's important, there were a lot of people right in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. A lot of Russian businessmen, a lot of representatives of Russian middle class who were really terrified by the war, who really wanted to speak up, to oppose, who were dreaming of leaving Russia, of fleeing to the West, who were willing to donate to Ukrainian army and to support Ukraine. And I know a lot of people who had to come back. That was not the part of the plan. That was just no plan. Somehow those people could not stay in Europe, could not go to the West because they found their bank's accounts frozen because of their Russian passport. There was, obviously, it was very hard to make that strategy, how to attract potential allies, how not to push them towards Putin. It was really hard to create that strategy in 2022. I think it's right time to create the strategy now, because it's still, probably it's late, but it's not too late. Still, there are a lot of people who are exhausted, a lot of people in Russia who hate this war, who do not believe that Putin is going to win, and they are sometimes, when I'm reading the interviews of Russian businessmen in the foreign media, like they seem like the signals from sleeping cell, and they are waiting for some conditions to defect to the West. They want that, and I think the strategy how to split Russian elite, how not to let Putin control all and suppress all those mid-level businessmen or larger businesses and help them to start fighting against him, I think that kind of strategy is needed. And when we're speaking about the Russian people, the Russian society, obviously we know that about any nation in the world, it's very diverse. When we speak about Russian people, at least we have two Russian peoples. We have two generations of Russians, and they're really different. People who were born and raised in the Soviet Union, people of Putin's generation, more or less, and the younger post-Soviet generation, they are completely culturally different. I have only one example about the recent survey, how Russian society, what Russian society wants to do with LGBT people. And it's very clear that people elder than 50, 60% of them want death penalty. Just kill them all. People younger than 50, 60% of them are for equal rights. They want same-sex marriages to be legalized. So the gap, the generation gap is that big. People who were born and raised after the collapse of Soviet Union, they were not educated in troubled neighborhoods. They don't have the gulag values of the older generations. They had internet since their high school. They share the same, a lot of them share the same values. So inside Russia, there are so many different societies, and one of them is very different from the Andropov's or Soviet-minded Putin's generation.
We have a lot of fascinating questions coming in on Slido. I wanted to turn also to the audience. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of very interesting questions. Okay, I see two up front, one over here and one over here. Let's start with this one. But we only have a few minutes left, obviously, so I would encourage everyone to keep their answers brief.
Thank you so much. My name is Miranda Mushkina. I'm from Ukraine. I was on Globsec last year. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was talking a lot about repentance that year. This year we are talking about strategy. This year we are talking more about basically having separated Russian people from Putin's war. So you criticized the lack of strategy from the West. So what is the strategy, the communication strategy of the opposition? You are the voice. You are the voice that has the main stages in Europe and the States. How do you approach your people? It's not for the West to have a strategy. You are Russians. This is your country. How can you ensure what the messages you can build to actually reach out to those people who, as Mikhail Khodorkovsky said, Mikhail Zygar said, that are waiting for the changes or are still not supporting the war but living in Russians. It's been 2.5 years since full-scale invasion and over 10 years since annexation of Crimea and eastern Ukraine. So please elaborate on the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Please try to keep your answers brief so we can address a lot of questions.
This is a question that we in our groups, both opposition and media groups, keep thinking about every day, how to deliver this message. And we are always tailoring the message to the audience. The media that I work with, that's roughly 60 million views a month from Russia. That's what we get. And of course, our actions are not always successful, but we do what we can with what we have.
Just a short answer. I started with that. On the first year of the full-scale invasion, I personally wrote the book which is called War and Punishment, and it addresses Russian imperial history. And so I see my mission in destruction of traditional Russian historian myths. I know that it's going to take us decades to make that idea popular in Russia. But we have started. I think that's one of the missions that have to be fulfilled.
Well, you mentioned history. There's a very interesting question from Alina Frolova on Slido asking what in Russian history or today makes you think the population wants to be a democracy. I don't know if you would also address that very briefly.
We have a lot of different, in traditional propagandist historical narrative that is fake. Russia has always been a monstrous empire, but it is fake. So Russia is rather new country. It's like Russian Empire is there for 300 years. So Russian history is approximately the same long as American history, for example. And yes, there was period of autocracy. Before that, there were different Russias and different types of states within the same Russian Empire. The current Russia, there was Golden Horde, which was a tyranny, and there was Novgorod Republic, which was in several in medieval centuries. It was one of the largest. Almost democratic countries in Europe, and it looked like Venetian Republic. So we have a lot of different traditions. They are not known to the population of Russia. They were suppressed by the official historiography. Actually, in the same way, we have a history of Russian dissidents fighting, and actually Russian culture. Leo Tolstoy was the spiritual leader of Russian opposition in the end of 19th century, and all of his political works and political essays are not known to our compatriots, but actually he was really important. He was the person who influenced the Russian Revolution of 1917, and most of the members of the provisional government were his students. So we still have a lot of material to work with.
We have about 5 minutes left, and please keep the questions brief. I did see your hand also first.
Thank you. Violeta Pashutina, Liberal Political Party Voice. My question is, are you ready to support Ukraine's ask to allow to use wide-range weapons upon Russian territory? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not Russian here, but like replicating the Western debate, it's to all true friends of liberty and those who want to help Ukraine win the war. Yes, that is a necessary measure, and it's unavoidable. If you want Ukraine to win the war, you have to remove the caveats on missiles and airstrikes into Russian territory. That's all I can say.
Mikhail Borisovich.
Well, since we are the guilty ones, we are the ones with the broken arm, I can say I would be welcoming a surgeon coming in with a knife, but I understand why he would.
I definitely want Russian state to be defeated, and I definitely support. There are a lot of things that I support. I support the necessity of closing the Ukrainian airspace and not allowing Russian missiles to bomb Kyiv, and like a lot needs to be done. Not only what you've mentioned, much more.
Thanks. I want to respect all the people that submitted on Slido and even took the time to vote and like different questions. So I want to take Simon Radford's question. Liberal parties have always polled poorly, and support has been consigned to intelligentsia. What is the ideological makeup of a viable opposition? I don't know who wants to answer that first. Perhaps Mikhail Borisovich.
На мой взгляд, в России после Путина.
Well, I think the post-Putin Russia will be based on 4, let's say, pillars. First, we will have a liberal democratic opposition, we'll have the left-leaning opposition, which is mixing with the liberal Democrats somewhat. There will be nationalist opposition, and there will be this separate element, let's call it bureaucratic opposition. This is, I think, the four elements that we can expect to make up the public opinion or affect the public opinion after the Putin's regime is gone.
We don't know that. We don't have any proper statistics because for decades the main target of Russian regime and of Russian propaganda were so-called liberals. If they don't care about liberals, if liberals are so weak and so not important, why they, like, that was the only goal of all the prosecution. They were attacking liberal politicians, liberal media, all 25 years of Putin's reign. And if we read Russian propagandists right now, you know, that's, there was a Russian joke. I was running behind you for 3 days and 3 nights just to tell you that I'm indifferent to you. That's what they do. So if I guess that in future, we saw that when Soviet Union was collapsing. We saw all those huge pro-democracy protest rallies in Moscow and in other cities of the former Soviet Union. That time, at least, there was no doubt that democratic ideas were really popular among wide range of Russian population.
Thanks. Roland, do you want to make some wrap-up comments or respond to what you've heard?
Look, when it comes to strategy, the military victory of Ukraine and the defeat of Russia is a maybe insufficient, but definitely necessary precondition for any positive change in Russia. It's no guarantee. Putin could even survive, at least for a limited amount of time, a military defeat. But if there is territorial gains, for example, in some kind of deal, ceasefire and peace deal with Ukraine, if there is anything that Putin can sell as a gain, he will stay in power longer. And that has to be our supreme goal at the moment, to prevent such a situation. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Well, this is the second year running that I have moderated a panel, I think, under this title, also with Mikhail Borisovich. Let's see if we will all meet again on this stage next year to discuss these questions, or if they will be different a bit. I'd like to conclude and to welcome the Globsec Masters of Ceremony, Kim Dozier and Steve Clemens, on the stage, and just to say thank you also very much to our panelists. These are not easy questions, and we'll be discussing them, I think, for many years to come. Thank you.
Job. What a great job. Fantastic way to bring this Globsec 2024 to an end. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. All right, everybody, we want you to stay in your seats because we're about to have the final act of Globsec 2024. And look, I want to be honest, we've got some bad news and some good news. The bad news is, well, let me do the good news first. The good news is we've tamed a lot of the storm. The bad news is there's more storm to tame. We're going to hear a little bit about that in a moment. But right now we've got a little... Oh, and Kim, we're going to step up and be right back. We're going to let the video go and then we'll come right back.
Sounds great.
But watch this.
So, starting as we mean to go on or end,